Beauty fades, her mother used to say as she smoothed Elara Thorn's stubborn dark hair. What you carry inside is what lasts. Elara clung to those words through every hollow year that followed. Through the cough that stole her mother's breath. Through the long winter her father did not come home. Through the slow realization that love could vanish and leave nothing but dust and debts behind. When he finally returned to Thornwood, he did not come alone. He brought a wife spun in gold and a daughter who looked as if the sun itself had chosen her. Lady Maven walked into their crumbling manor like she was doing the house a kindness by existing in it. At her side glided Sylvain, slender, luminous, already adored by the wolves who prowled the estate's edge. Elara had never seen a first shift so early. Sylvain's silver wolf shimmered like moonlight on new snow. Elara's wolf was nothing at all. No tremor beneath her skin when the moon waxed high. No sense of fur waiting just beneath the surface. Just an empty place where a part of herself should have been. Her father never said it aloud, but Elara watched the way his shoulders eased when Sylvain laughed, how he straightened when Maven slipped her hand through his arm, how his gaze slid past Elara as if she were another crack in the plaster. Whatever pride he had left belonged to his gleaming new family. Maven was careful, at first. "Don't scowl so, dear," she would murmur, lips soft, eyes sharp. "Envy is unworthy of a thorn. Try to smile, even if it doesn't help." When father was home she arranged Elara at the table like an afterthought, one hand looping around Sylvain's shoulders while the other patted Elara's head without looking. "She's not like Sylvain," Maven would sigh when she thought Elara couldn't hear. "So intense. So brooding. It unsettles the other girls. I do worry she'll grow bitter." Father, tired and dazzled, only nodded. So Elara built her worth out of whatever they didn't value. She devoured the dusty books left in the study, learned to read old runes and newer trade tongues, taught herself to count faster than the steward. She solved puzzles no one else had patience for, untangled pack histories, and pieced together the logic of curses and oaths as if they were intricate clockwork. It was that mind which drew the first real attention she'd ever had. The night the Beta Lord arrived, everyone assumed he had come for Sylvain. He was one of the Alpha King's most trusted wolves, known as much for his discernment as his scars. Maven spent the afternoon fussing over Sylvain's hair, Sylvain's gown, Sylvain's smile. Yet when the supper candles burned low, the Beta's gaze kept sliding past Sylvain's beauty to where Elara sat quiet at the far end of the table, fingers stained with ink. He asked a question about a border dispute, she answered without thinking, citing case law from a century past. Intrigued, he pressed for more, strategy, history, the strange way curses sometimes clung to bloodlines. By the time he rose to leave, the entire household knew the truth. The great Beta had asked for Elara's hand, not Sylvain's. For one heart-stopping night, her mother's words finally felt like a promise instead of a lie. Beauty fades. What you carry inside is what lasts. Maven's smile stretched tight and thin, and something cold and poisonous flickered in her eyes. That was the night she brought Elara the milk. "Warm spiced milk helps the nerves," Maven cooed, appearing at Elara's door with a cup cradled in both hands. Her voice was all gentle concern, her perfume all roses and ash. "You must sleep, child. Tomorrow changes everything." Elara took the cup with trembling fingers. Tomorrow, she told herself, she might belong. Tomorrow, her father might look at her and see more than a shadow. Tomorrow, she might finally have enough. The milk was sweet and heavy on her tongue. She fell into dreams thick as fog, wolves pacing behind cracked mirrors, Sylvain laughing from the other side of glass, her own reflection stretching and tearing as if someone were trying to pull a second body out of her skin. She woke to pain. Her attic was dim, gray light leaking through warped boards. The cup lay on its side, its last pale drop soaking into the floorboards near her knees. Elara dragged herself toward the mirror, heart hammering, breath sawtoothed. For a heartbeat she thought she was still dreaming. Wolf ears jutted through her hair, fur coarse and dark. Patches of the same rough pelt crawled down her cheeks and throat, vanishing beneath her nightgown. Her hands shook, longer nails, almost claws. And her eyes. Her eyes blazed back at her from the cracked glass, a vicious, unnatural red. She was no wolf standing proud on four legs. No woman with a wolf curled safely inside. She was trapped halfway between, twisted into a thing that belonged to neither world. Maven's delighted laugh when she barged into the room burned into Elara's memory almost as sharply as the transformation itself. "Don't pout, child," her stepmother crooned, not bothering to hide the triumph in her face. That beta needed to see Sylvain was his only sensible option. Besides, she tilted Elara's chin up, forcing her to meet her own monstrous reflection, "Your curse will break one day. When someone willingly takes you as you are." Then she left Elara alone with the shattered mirror and the sound of her own screaming. The children's rhyme came first, always. Red eyes, watch her creep. Prowl the roads while good folk sleep. Hide your lambs and bar your door. If Red Eyes knock, she'll want more. Their thin voices skipped across the cobblestones, bright and cruel and unafraid, until their mothers noticed where those childish gazes were drifting. Then hands snatched little shoulders, heads turned sharply away, and the song died in a flurry of shushing. Elara pulled her hood lower and pretended she didn't hear. Years had passed since the night of the spiced milk. Long enough that the story of the cursed girl of Thornwood had swollen into legend, picking up teeth and shadows as it rolled from village to village. Long enough that Elara Thorn belonged to the same breath as monster. She kept to the edges of the market, moving like a shadow pressed into a cloak. Even so, people felt her, the way animals feel a storm brewing. "Please," she murmured to the bread seller, keeping her voice soft, her head bowed so the hood hid as much of her face as it could. She slid a small bundle of mushrooms across the rough wooden counter. "They're good morels. Rare. Enough to flavor 3 stews. I only need a loaf." The woman never quite looked at her. "Keep moving, Red Eyes," she muttered, eyes fixed on a spot somewhere above Elara's shoulder. "You scare off my custom." Elara glanced left and right. The neighboring stalls stood half empty already. No one lingered near her, not even by accident. Space opened around her the way it opened around a fire that might suddenly leap the hearth. She tucked the mushrooms back into her satchel, the leather worn soft by years of use. Her stomach pinched with hunger, but that was an old ache. Easier to bear than the newer one, the sting every time someone refused to meet her gaze, as if eye contact alone might curse them. Beneath the hood, her ears twitched, catching every muttered prayer, every nervous shuffle. Fur tipped them still, coarse and dark, emerging from her hair like unwanted thoughts. The same fur curved over her cheekbones and along her forearms beneath the cloak. When she bared her teeth to bite back a bitter laugh, she felt the sharp prickle of elongated canines against her tongue. Not human. Not a wolf. A creature caught mid-change forever. Once, years ago, in a cold attic with a broken mirror, she had woken to this shape and believed it was the worst thing that could ever happen to her. That was before the songs. Before, the way strangers would cross themselves and drag their children away. Before officials muttered about disturbances and omens and easier solutions. Before whispers started that Red Eyes was responsible for every torn sheep, every missing lamb, every shadow moving where it should not. She adjusted the strap of her satchel and turned away from the stall, the hood casting the world into a narrow tunnel of vision. If she kept walking, if she kept to herself, if she stayed useful in the wilds with her herbs and her wits, perhaps the world would leave her alone. It hadn't, of course. It wouldn't. Not when fear needed a face. Not when a jealous woman's curse still clung to her like a second skin. And not when, far from this shabby market, an alpha king sat on an obsidian throne in a hall of stone and shadow, listening to reports of a monster with red eyes haunting his borders. Elara did not yet know his name, or that his offer would change everything. For now, all she had was an old rhyme in the mouths of children, a curse that would only break if someone chose her exactly as she was, and a past that began long before the title Red Eyes of Thornwood ever existed. It began with a plain girl, a dying mother's words about what truly lasts, and the first time Lady Maven Thorn smiled at her like a wolf baring its teeth. That was the story Elara tried not to remember. And the one her past was determined to drag her back into. Subscribe now so you're here for every turn this story takes. Years before the markets and the rhymes and the name Red Eyes, there had only been Elara in Thornwood Manor and the echo of her mother's voice in every empty room. She was 12 the winter her father left for the border courts. The housekeeper said he went to secure their future, but all Elara heard was the sound of hooves fading down the lane while her mother coughed into blood-spotted linen. The manor shrank when he was gone. The great hall felt too tall, the long table absurd with only 2 plates. Her mother's laugh, once bright enough to fill the gaps, became thinner each week. "Don't look like that," her mother would chide gently when she caught Elara watching the way her hands trembled. "Thorns bend in the wind, but they don't break. And neither do we." "Beauty fades," Elara whispered back, finishing the mantra. "What you carry inside is what lasts." Her mother smiled and smoothed her hair, even when her fingers shook. Exactly. When the fever finally took her, the house went quiet in a new, awful way. Servants moved with soft, sorry eyes. The steward spoke to Elara in a voice one uses for spooked horses. Letters went out to distant relatives and to her absent father. "He will come home," Elara told herself. "He has to." She spent her days in the unused study, teaching herself to read the cramped writing in old ledgers and war journals, tracing the curling shapes of ancient runes with ink-stained fingers. Numbers and laws and stories were easier to hold than grief. By the time the carriage rolled back through Thornwood's gate months later, she had learned to live more in the pages of books than in the rooms of her own house. She stood on the front steps in a plain dark dress, hands clenched at her sides, heart hammering with relief and hurt and something almost like resentment. The carriage door opened. Her father stepped out first, older and leaner, eyes tired but bright with a nervous kind of pride. Behind him, a woman emerged, skirts of gold silk spilling over the carriage step like poured sunlight. Her hair gleamed, her smile dazzled, and her eyes swept over the weathered manor with the faint impatience of someone assessing a stray dog. "Lady Maven Thorn," father said, voice too loud. "Your new mother." Elara's breath hitched. "Your mother." As if mothers could be swapped like worn shoes. Then another figure climbed down, taking her hand to steady herself, a girl about Elara's age with hair the same bright gold as Maven's and a face that looked carved for compliments. "This is Sylvain," Maven said. Her voice, unlike her smile, had teeth. "Your sister." Sylvain's dress was the finest silk. Elara's was a black that had faded to murky gray. Sylvain's shoes shone. Elara's boots were scuffed and cracked. Sylvain's fingers were soft, uncalloused. Elara's were stained with ink and dust. For a moment, Elara saw herself reflected in Sylvain's wide, curious eyes, too thin, too pale, too plain. But then she repeated silently, "Beauty fades. What you carry inside is what lasts," and forces herself to stand straighter. Maven took in Elara's determined chin and swallowed smile. "We'll make something of you yet," she murmured. "A bit of polish, a better dress." Later, Elara would realize she had said something of you, not someone. Thornwood changed quickly. Golden tapestries replaced her mother's faded wall hangings. Crystal decanters glittered where simple clay jugs had sat. Laughter echoed through rooms that had only heard the creak of old wood for months, but it wasn't Elara's laughter. It was Sylvain's, trilling and bright, as she spun in new gowns or showed off the flawless curve of her handwriting. Maven praised her with every breath. "Look at that, my love," Maven would say as father watched Sylvain practice courtly dance steps before the fire. "Such grace. The very image of a lady of the court." "And Elara?" father would ask, almost as an afterthought. "Oh, Elara is intense," Maven replied with a sigh that sounded like concern. "So serious. She'll grow into herself, I'm sure. One just hopes it isn't bitter. Envy is such an unlovely thing." Elara learned to make herself smaller in those moments, quiet at the corner of the hearth, book open in her lap. She pretended she didn't hear. She pretended her father's distracted nod didn't sting. When Sylvain's wolf surfaced, the entire manor celebrated. It happened on a night when the moon rode low and full. Sylvain screamed, not in pain but in ecstasy, as her bones flowed like water and fur burst from her skin, a coat of silver so pure it seemed almost blue. She stood on 4 delicate paws at the center of the great hall, panting lightly, tail raised, a creature from a storybook. The pack's elders blessed her. Servants whispered about omens and destiny. Elara watched from the balcony, fingers digging into the railing, heart drumming in her ears. Nothing moved beneath her own skin. No wildness stirred in answer. She was only Elara, only human, only lacking. Maven caught her watching and smiled up at her, all sympathy and subtle glee. "Don't sulk, dear," she called. "Not everyone blooms as early as Sylvain. Perhaps yours is simply sleeping." Elara swallowed back the croak of "what if it never wakes at all?" and fled back to the study where books waited, solid and understandable. Her wolfless state became another of Maven's conversational weapons. "She struggles," Maven confided to father one evening, voice soft with carefully measured worry. "No sign of a shift at all. Such a burden for a girl surrounded by so much beauty and promise. I do hope she doesn't turn jealous. Envy is unworthy of a thorn." Father, exhausted from council meetings and dazzled still by Sylvain's silver wolf, only rubbed his temples. "Do what you can for her, Maven," he said. "You know best in these matters." And so Maven did. She arranged Elara's lessons so they always overlapped with Sylvain's outings, leaving Elara alone with tutors and ledgers while Sylvain went riding with visiting noble sons. When father was home, she made a point of inviting Elara to join them just late enough that the best seat by the fire was always taken, the best slice of meat always gone, the best stories always already told. Come, Elara, Maven would say, gesturing to a chair slightly back from the circle. Don't look like that. You're part of this family too. Her tone said otherwise. The first real fracture came the night the Beta Lord arrived. News reached Thornwood days ahead of him. One of the Alpha King's most famed lieutenants was traveling the region, scouting alliances and, rumor whispered, seeking a mate. Maven's household went into a flurry of preparation. Curtains were drawn back to let more light in. Floors were scrubbed until the stone gleamed. Sylvain tried on half a dozen gowns before Maven settled on one the color of new leaves, which made her eyes seem greener and her hair even more gold. Stand straight, Maven urged, adjusting a fold of silk. Smile, but not too wide. You want to look demure, not desperate. Let him see your wolf, but don't show off. Men prefer a hint of mystery. Elara watched from the doorway, hands unconsciously smoothing her own plain dress of dark blue wool. And me? She asked lightly. Should I hide in the cellar so my plainness doesn't offend him? Maven looked her over, eyes lingering on the ink smudge at her wrist, the callus where quill met skin, the stubborn lift of her chin. Don't be absurd, she said at last. You'll sit at the table, of course. Family should be present. Just try not to scowl. It makes you look severe. Severe. Intense. Jealous. The words piled up inside Elara like stones. When the Beta arrived, he was not at all what she'd expected. Older than the stories made him sound, with scars along one cheek and the calm, measuring gaze of someone accustomed to weighing danger. His wolf, they said, was coal-black and fearsome in battle. In human form he carried that same coiled strength. At supper, Maven arranged the seating so he sat directly across from Sylvain. Candles glowed on polished silver, the roast smelled rich and spiced. Sylvain laughed at all the right moments, lashes lowered, words practiced. Elara, exiled to the far end of the table near the steward, kept her head down and focused on the meat cooling on her plate. She didn't notice when the Beta's attention shifted. Forgive me, he said suddenly, cutting across Sylvain's description of the latest festival. But I couldn't help overhearing your steward mention a border disagreement on the eastern ridge. You have wolves claiming overlapping grazing rights? Father blinked. Ah. Yes. A tedious matter. It's not tedious if it turns bloody, the Beta said mildly. His gaze tracked down the table, not to Sylvain, but past her, to where Elara sat. She froze, fork halfway to her mouth. You've studied pack law, have you not? He asked her. Heat climbed Elara's neck. Some, she managed. Mostly out of old case ledgers. The ridge dispute isn't truly about land. It's about water. The stream that splits the border dries up every third summer. Whoever holds the higher ground controls the last pool. If you offer to maintain a communal cistern under Thornwood's protection and require both packs to contribute labor, you'll make them too invested to risk open conflict. Silence fell around the table. The Beta's eyes lit with something like admiration. You've given this thought. I like puzzles, Elara said, her voice steadier now. And people are often the most predictable parts of them. Maven's smile stiffened. All evening, the Beta kept returning to Elara with questions, not about dresses or festivals, but about history, strategy, the strange logic of binding oaths. Elara answered, at first cautiously, then with increasing ease as she realized he wasn't mocking her. He delighted in her mind, not in spite of it. By the end of the night, he asked to speak with Father privately. When Father emerged from the study later, his expression was one Elara had never seen directed at her before, half astonishment, half dawning pride. "Elara," he said, voice rough. "Lord Vale has expressed interest in you." Maven went very still. Sylvain's hand tightened around the stem of her wineglass until it cracked, red spilling like blood across the tablecloth. Elara could barely breathe. "In me?" "For your intelligence," Father said, almost disbelieving. "He says his position demands a mate who understands law, strategy, and the demands of ruling. He believes you are suited." Elara's heart felt too large for her chest. Her mother's words rang in her ears like a bell. "Beauty fades. What you carry inside is what lasts." For the first time, they felt like the truth. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes she saw a different future, a life in the Beta's stronghold, books and counsels and a partner who respected her mind. A place where she was not lesser. The knock on her door came softly, just as she finally began to drift. "Elara, dear?" Maven's voice. Smooth as cream. "May I come in?" Elara sat up, heart thudding. "Why, yes." Maven slipped inside carrying a small tray. Upon it, a single cup steamed gently, scented with honey and spice. "I thought you might have trouble sleeping," Maven said, setting the tray on the rickety bedside table. The room, once her parents' spare chamber, had become Elara's exile under the eaves, low ceiling, cracked plaster, one small window. Maven's gown seemed too rich for it. Big day, and bigger tomorrow. Elara searched her face for mockery and found only soft concern. "It is a great honor," Maven continued, settling on the edge of the bed. "Lord Vale is powerful. Respected. I want you at your best when he comes to formalize his suit. Warm milk helps calm the nerves." She lifted the cup, pressing it into Elara's hands. The porcelain was warm. "The scent is comforting." Elara hesitated for only a moment. "She's trying," Elara told herself. "She's never liked me, but she's trying. Perhaps this changes everything for all of us." She drank. The milk was sweeter than she expected, the spices unfamiliar but pleasant. A pleasant heaviness spread through her limbs, sleep tugging at her eyelids in gentle waves. "Rest now," Maven murmured, stroking her hair in a gesture that almost felt like a mother's touch. "Tomorrow will make you shine." The last thing Elara saw before darkness swallowed the room was Maven's smile, perfect, poised, eyes gleaming like a cat's in the half-light. The dreams that followed were not her own. Wolves ran through them, jaws bloody, fur slick with moonlight. Mirrors lined a corridor without end, each one reflecting a different Elara, taller, shorter, older, younger, but all of them cracked, shards missing, faces warping. Sylvain appeared in one mirror only, untouched, laughing behind a veil of silver fur. Somewhere, something held. Elara woke to the taste of metal in her mouth and the sound of her own ragged breathing. The room was gray with early dawn. The cup lay on its side, a pale smear of milk drying on the floorboards. Her head pounded. Her skin itched as if 1,000 invisible insects crawled just under the surface. She pushed herself upright, heart racing. And the world felt wrong. Her ears caught every distant sound with painful clarity, the drip of water in the far kitchen, the roll of cartwheels on the road below, the flutter of birds' wings in the eaves. Her nose wrinkled at scents she'd never noticed so sharply: smoke, wool, the sour tang of her own sweat. Her hands shook as she staggered toward the cracked mirror above the wash-basin. For a heartbeat, she saw herself as she'd always been, plain, sleep-ruffled, eyes wide with confusion. Then she blinked. Wolf ears jutted through her hair, fur coarse and dark against her scalp. Patches of the same rough pelt crawled down her cheeks and neck, vanishing beneath her nightgown. Her pupils burned crimson, ringed with a predatory glow. When she gasped, elongated canines scraped against her lower lip, sharp enough to draw blood. She clutched the edge of the basin, knuckles white. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Her voice broke into a rasping cry. The door slammed open. Maven stood framed in the doorway, night robe artfully parted, hair in a tousled cascade that looked intentional. For one heartbeat she wore an expression of perfect shock. Then her gaze took in the ears, the fur, the teeth, the hellish red eyes, and her features rearranged into something bright and terrible. "Oh, Elara," she breathed, hand to her lips. "What have you become?" Elara tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked sound. Tears blurred her vision, making the monstrous reflection wobble. Maven stepped closer, skirts whispering across the floor. "Don't pout, child," she said, no longer bothering with the veneer of concern. Triumphant light gleamed in her eyes. Lord Vale needed to see that Sylvain was his only sensible option. You would have made such a difficult Beta's lady, so intense, always correcting everyone. Elara stared at her, horror hollowing her out. "You did this," she managed, voice raw. Maven tilted her head. "Not I," she said lightly. "You heard the curse, didn't you? It clung to you the moment you drank." She lifted Elara's chin with cool fingers, forcing her to meet her own gaze in the mirror. "Still, don't despair entirely," Maven went on. "There's an escape clause. All good spells have them. Yours will break one day, when someone willingly takes you as you are." Her smile widened, a slow, satisfied curve. "A man would have to be very brave, or very foolish, to marry a creature like this. But who knows? Miracles happen." She dropped Elara's chin and swept from the room, calling down the stairs for the servants to fetch father, for someone to send word to Lord Vale, for discreet silence. Elara sank to her knees on the splintered floor, claws digging into the wood, and screamed until her throat was raw. The days that followed blurred. Father could barely look at her. When he did, his gaze skittered away as if ashamed of what he saw. "We'll find a healer," he said once, voice shaking. "There must be someone, some mage, some priest." "There is no cure for curses born from within," Maven interrupted gently. "You heard the wise woman's words, my love. This is a manifestation of Elara's own turmoil. For Sylvain's sake, we must be careful. We can't risk the curse spreading." Elara sat at the far end of the hall while they spoke, fingers curled around the edge of her chair hard enough to leave dents. Each word landed like a stone. Within a week, she was moved from her attic room to an even smaller space at the edge of the servants' wing. Then, for everyone's safety, she was told it would be best if she left Thornwood entirely. "Just for a while," Father said, not meeting her eyes. "Until we sort this out. Maven has been so kind, but you can't expect her to keep Sylvain under the same roof as this. We'll send coin. You're clever. You'll manage." Maven watched from the doorway as Elara packed a single satchel, a cloak, a few worn dresses, the smallest of her books. Her hands shook, but she did not cry. She felt as if she had already shed all the tears Thornwood would ever get from her. At the gate, Father pressed a purse into her hand and mumbled something about regret, about doing what was best for the family. When Elara looked up to answer, Maven's fingers tightened around his arm. "Go now," Maven said softly. "Before anyone sees. You don't want to cause a scene, do you?" Elara stepped beyond the threshold of her childhood home with the fur on her cheeks prickling, her red eyes burning, and the knowledge that she belonged nowhere. Behind her, the gate closed with a final, metallic clang. Ahead of her lay the long road to the outer villages, the dark woods, the chance to survive alone on wits and herbcraft. And somewhere far beyond the trees, in a fortress of stone and shadow, an Alpha King sat on an obsidian throne, his 6 sisters dancing themselves toward death each night. It would be years before their paths crossed. Years before the name Red Eyes of Thornwood reached his ears. Years before his offer would drag her from exile to the very heart of his court and place her life, and the fate of his kingdom, on the edge of a bargain. But that was another thread in the tapestry. For now, Elara Thorn walked away from Thornwood Manor stripped of family, cursed into a half-wolf shape that made children sing about monsters, and clinging still, despite everything, to the faint, stubborn hope that somewhere in the world, what she carried inside might yet be enough to save her. Years after she walked away from Thornwood with a satchel on her back and a curse in her skin, Elara Thorn found herself behind another door, this one carved from ironwood and locked from the outside. The chamber was small but not cruel. A narrow bed, a washstand, a slit of a window that looked across a courtyard of black stone. On the other side of the far wall, she could hear the soft murmur of women's voices and the occasional drag of exhausted footsteps. The Alpha King's sisters. Rael had not wasted words when he condemned her to this task. He'd listened to the charges leveled against the monster with red eyes, watched her with that cold, unblinking gaze, and, when she'd snatched at the only weapon she had, her mind, he'd made a bargain instead of an execution. 3 nights to uncover why his 6 sisters woke each morning with their slippers worn through and their bodies hollowed, as if they had danced themselves toward death. If she succeeded, he would grant her freedom and one favor of her choosing. If she failed, she would die. Simple terms. Impossible odds. The lock clicked now and the door swung inward. A young woman stood there, no older than Elara, in a nightgown of pale blue velvet. She was lovely in the way Rael was frightening, high cheekbones, soft mouth, hair like spun copper spilling down her back. Shadows bruised the skin beneath her eyes, and the delicate bones of her wrists looked as if they might snap under the weight of her own hands. "I'm Lyris," she said quietly. "Third sister. We drew lots and I lost, so I was chosen to be the first to speak to you." Her smile wobbled. "You're different than I expected." "I tend to be," Elara said dryly. Lyris held out a small clay cup, steam coiling from its rim. "The hall here is noisy. You'll have trouble sleeping. The healer prepares this for us every night. It dulls the mind a little. Helps. Warm drink. Sweet smile." Elara's throat tightened. She thought of Maven at her bedside, the way honey and spice had coated her tongue, the way her world had shattered by morning. "Thank you," Elara said, taking the cup. "You're kind." She waited until Lyris turned away, shoulders slumping as she moved back through the joining door to where the other princesses murmured and coughed. Only then did Elara cross to the small window and tip the cup, watching milky liquid patter silently down the stone wall outside. Her hands shook until the last drop disappeared. Never again, she promised herself. No more trusting cups. Night in the fortress came down like a shroud. The courtyard torches guttered lower, their light thinning on the stones. Somewhere far below, drums beat a slow, steady rhythm for the changing of the guard. Elara lay on the narrow bed, fully clothed, eyes closed, breathing even. Her ears, still furred, still cursed, caught the footfalls of the sentry outside her door, then the soft clink of pottery. A pause. A sigh. A body slumping against the wall. The draft had worked on him, at least. Elara slid from the bed and pressed her ear to the joining door. Beyond it, the murmur of voices had gone silent. Then, faintly, she heard the soft scrape of bare feet. She eased the door open a crack. 6 women moved through the adjoining chamber, their faces calm, their steps slow and synchronized. They wore thin slippers and gowns that shimmered faintly, as if dusted with starlight. Though their eyes were open, there was something terribly empty about them, as if they were pointing in the right direction but the thoughts behind them were elsewhere. Princesses? Elara whispered. None of them turned. The eldest, tall, with rail-sharp cheekbones, crossed to the far corner of the room and pressed her palm against a patch of flagstone carved with an old, nearly worn-away sigil. Stone ground softly. A section of the floor sank and slid aside, revealing a spiral stair leading down into darkness. Elara's heart kicked against her ribs. So this was how they left the safety of the palace each night without the guards noticing. Not through doors or gates, but through the bones of the fortress itself. The sisters descended, one after another, their movements eerie in their grace. Elara slipped through the gap just before the floor closed again, her cloak brushing the eldest's trailing skirts. No one reacted. It was like shadowing a procession of sleepwalkers. The stair wound down and down, the air growing cooler, the stone damp beneath Elara's bare feet. Bioluminescent lichen clung to the walls, casting a faint green glow. Far below, a new sound rose to meet them, music, thin and distant, a pattern of notes that burrowed under her skin. They reached the bottom at last. The world opened. They stepped out into a vast cavern whose ceiling soared high enough to hold a borrowed sky. Twilight hung above them, shot through with slow-moving ribbons of light. Trees rose from the rocky ground, their trunks banded in gold, their leaves glimmering silver and blue. The very air seemed to hum with music and murmured laughter. In the center of it all lay a lake like a mirror of molten glass. Boats bobbed at its edge, each one crafted from some strange crystalline substance that caught the light in rainbow shards. Waiting beside them stood young men and women in garments that shone like frost, their beauty so precise it made Elara's teeth ache. Their eyes, though, held a glint too sharp to be human. Fae. The princesses moved past Elara, each going to a waiting partner as if following a script. The Fae offered their hands with courtly bows, guiding the women into the boats. No one seemed to see Elara. For the first time in her life, her curse felt like a cloak of its own, something that blurred her at the edges, turned her into mist and shadow. Or perhaps whatever enchantment held the princesses simply didn't account for a stray half-wolf girl. Boats pushed off one by one, gliding across the unnaturally still surface. Elara stood alone on the shore. For a heartbeat she considered turning back. She had already learned something, hadn't she? Secret stairs, underground lakes, Fae suitors. It might be enough to buy her another day of life. Then she pictured Rael's face. Emotionless. waiting. His sister's frail wrists. Their dark-circled eyes. Not enough. Water whispered against crystal. A small ripple touched the shore near her boots. Elara looked up. A seventh boat had glided close without a sound. It was narrower than the others, its sides etched with curling runes that seemed to rearrange themselves when she tried to read them. At its stern stood a man in black. He was lean and tall, dark hair falling in loose waves to his shoulders. His coat looked woven from shadow and starlight, embroidered with threads that glowed faintly along his sleeves. But it was his eyes that froze her, their irises a pale, unsettling silver blue that seemed to hold the reflection of the entire lake. He leaned on his pole, regarding her with mild amusement. "Well," he said. His voice slid over her skin like silk. "What have we here?" The Alpha King grows bolder. He sends wolves now instead of soldiers. Elara's hands tightened in her cloak. "I'm not a wolf." "Not entirely," he agreed, gaze flicking to where the hood hid the outline of her ears. "Not entirely human either." "Little wolf, then." "Half and half, like watered wine." She fought the urge to bare her teeth. "Are all boatmen in this place so rude, or is it just you?" His smile curved, slow, and delighted. "You noticed I'm rude. How refreshing. The princesses never notice anything. They slip into my boats like pretty dolls and let the music pull their strings." Behind him, the other vessels were already halfway across the lake, bearing rail sisters toward a distant shore where light and movement danced. "You're not going to stop them?" Elara asked. He lifted his shoulders in a lazy shrug. "The terms were set long ago. They dance, we watch. That is the bargain." "What bargain? With whom?" Questions, questions. He tapped the side of his boat with the pole. "Come along, little wolf. You'll see more from the other side than you will fretting on the shore. Unless you're afraid of deep water." She was afraid of many things. Cups. Mirrors. Women with smiles like knives. But she had never feared water. She hesitated, weighing danger against opportunity. The man extended a hand, palm up. "I give you my word you will reach the opposite bank alive. I will even return you to this shore before dawn, if that is what you wish." Fae could not lie, if the stories were true. Twist words, yes. Omit truths, certainly. But not lie. Elara stepped into the boat without taking his hand. Her cloak pulled around her feet, she kept the hood low, letting shadow hide as much of her face as it could. "Shy?" he asked, pushing off with an easy movement that sent them drifting. "Or simply hoarding your horrors for a more dramatic reveal?" "I've been stared at enough for one life," she muttered. His gaze lingered, thoughtful. "I do not mind curses. They make people interesting." She snorted. Said like someone who's never had to live under one. He laughed then, genuinely amused, and the boat slid soundlessly across the mirrored water toward a shore blazing with light. The court of Evernight rose before them, a palace grown from crystal and root. Spires arched into the twilight, their surfaces catching stray motes of magic until the whole structure seemed dusted with stars. A pavilion opened out over the lake, a vast, circular ballroom whose floor was polished to such a gleam it might have been another, inverted sky. Music poured from it, richer and louder now. Violins without strings, drums that beat themselves, a choir of unseen voices weaving melodies that tugged at Elara's bones. On that glittering floor, Rael's sisters danced. They whirled with Fae partners beneath chandeliers of hanging ice, their gowns flashing with every turn. Sweat shone on their brows, their smiles fixed, their eyes unfocused. Around the edges of the ballroom, more Fae lounged in crystal chairs, watching with the lazy hunger of cats at a pond. The amusement of kings, Elara whispered. Of one king in particular, her boatman said. He guided her to a small landing and offered his hand again. She ignored it, stepping out on her own. You're telling me they choose this? She demanded. Every night? He looked almost offended. Of course not. They are compelled. The curse binds their feet as surely as chains. If you listen closely, you can hear their bones protest. Elara swallowed bile. And no one has tried to stop it? Oh, many have tried. He gestured toward the far end of the pavilion, where a cluster of strange topiaries stood, trees whose trunks twisted in shapes that were almost human. Some lost their minds. Some lost their forms. Some became decorations. Her skin crawled. And you? She asked. What do you lose? Patience, he said lightly. The show does grow dull after the first 100 years. He turned to her, eyes bright. If it is proof you seek for your grim king wolf above, take a branch. He nodded toward a nearby column of crystal, where delicate limbs sprouted like frozen lightning. Bring it back to him. Tell him his sisters dance in the dark for the pleasure of the Fae. See what he does. Elara eyed the branch. It gleamed, each tiny shard catching and throwing back the light of the chandeliers. Every story she had ever read about the Fae whispered in the back of her mind. Never eat their food. Never give them your name. Never take what is theirs. She thought of Rael on his throne, expression carved from stone. The bargain hanging over her neck like a noose. Proof mattered. Elara Thorn, she said under her breath, naming herself to remind her who she was. Daughter of no one they can claim. She reached out and snapped off a slender crystal twig. The music stopped. The dancers froze mid-step. The watching Fae turned as one, their impossible faces suddenly very interested. Behind her, her boatman smiled. There now, he said softly. You've done it. Heat prickled the back of her neck. Done, what, exactly? Stolen from us. His eyes were almost gentle. And that breaks one of our oldest rules. No human may take from the court of Evernight without price. Elara's fingers tightened around the shard until its edges bit into her palm. You told me to take it. I invited you to, he corrected, sounding delighted. I did not say it was wise. Fae law wrapped words like vines around a tree. What's the price? She asked, forcing her voice to stay steady. He stepped away from the boat, into the center of the pavilion, and executed a sweeping bow. Allow me to introduce myself properly, he said, voice carrying easily in the sudden hush. I am Atheron, sovereign of this court, keeper of the Evernight, and, his gaze flicked to the frozen princesses, reluctant host to your king's sisters. He straightened, silver blue eyes gleaming. And by the rules that bind us all, little wolf, you now belong to me. The Fae around them stirred, whispering. Elara's heart slammed against her ribs. You tricked me, she said. I guided you, Atheron replied. There is a difference. Besides, I did promise to bring you back to the other shore alive if you wished. You have simply complicated what counts as you. For now, your life is entangled with my court. He paced a slow circle around her, studying her as if she were a particularly curious puzzle. But I am not unreasonable, he went on. The Alpha King's sisters are amusing, but they bore even me sometimes. I would not mind being rid of our arrangement. So, let us make a bargain of our own. Elara swallowed. Another bargain. You like them, he said cheerfully. You made one with your king, did you not? Here is mine, 3 trials. Pass them all, and I will release the princesses from their nightly compulsion and let you leave my court unharmed, with whatever proof your grim wolf requires. Fail, his smile sharpened. And I will plant you in my gardens as a golden tree. You will feel the sun and hear the music forever, but never move or speak again. Her gut clenched. She glanced at the princesses, still locked in their positions on the dance floor, chests heaving. She thought of Rael's bargain. Her own head on the block if she returned empty-handed. Between one nightmare and another, there was no real choice. 3 trials, she said slowly. No more, no less. If I succeed, you release them and me. If I fail, you make me a tree. Do you vow this? He inclined his head. I do. Magic shivered in the air, as tangible as a dropped veil. Then I agree, Elara said. The world shifted. The ballroom, the frozen dancers, the watching Fae, everything blurred, smearing into streaks of color. For a moment her stomach turned inside out. When the ground steadied beneath her feet again, she stood in a long hall lit by floating orbs. A table ran down its center, carved from some dark, gleaming wood. On it sat 2 goblets, one gilded and jeweled, the other plain and wooden. Atheron lounged in a high-backed chair at the far end, one ankle hooked over his knee. Trial the first, he announced. Before you are 2 cups. One holds a draught that will not harm you. The other holds enough poison to kill not only you, but every guest in my court, including myself. All you must do is drink from the safe one. Elara stared at the cups, then at him. That's not a trial. That's a suicide attempt with extra steps. He smiled lazily. I did not say you had to die. In fact, I prefer you don't. But the rules are simple. You can't lie, she said. His eyes glinted. No. Then tell me, is there exactly one safe goblet on this table? There is at least one safe goblet on this table, he replied promptly. Her pulse kicked. At least one. Is there at least one poisoned goblet on this table? She pressed. He tilted his head, considering. There is enough poison present to kill every living thing in this hall many times over. Present. Not necessarily in a visible cup. She turned her attention to the table itself, walking its length slowly. The jeweled goblet winked temptingly, the wooden one sat modest and unassuming. She did not touch either. Do I have to choose between the cups I see? She asked. You must drink from one goblet on this table, Atheron said, amusement curling around every word. One goblet. Not necessarily one she could see. Elara narrowed her eyes and dragged her fingers lightly along the polished surface, feeling for irregularities. Near the center, her hand met resistance. As though she had found the shape of a cup made of air. Invisible things still count, don't they? She murmured. Of course, Atheron said, watching her with open delight. Her fingers traced the rim of an unseen goblet, cool and smooth under her touch. Her pulse pounded. This could be the poisoned one just as easily as the others. But every instinct from a life spent parsing other people's words told her the danger lay in the obvious choices. She curled her hand around nothing and lifted. A weight settled in her grasp, the unmistakable heft of a full cup. Liquid sloshed, unseen but present. Elara took a breath so deep it hurt. "For the record," she said, "if this kills me, you'll be very bored for the rest of eternity." Then she tipped her head back and drank. The liquid was cold and sharp, tasting of starlight and iron. It burned down her throat and exploded in her chest like a swallowed star. Colors flared behind her eyes, lavender, gold, midnight blue, spinning faster and faster until the room tore away beneath her feet. She hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. When she opened her eyes, she lay on soft moss in a place that smelled of roses and rain. Hedges towered above her, woven from living thorns. They arched into the sky, forming walls and corridors that twisted out of sight. Roses bloomed along them, blood-red and ghost-white, their petals opening and closing as if breathing. "The second trial has already begun," Atheron's voice said from somewhere nearby. "You really should listen more closely when people speak." She pushed herself upright, blinking. He stood at the entrance to the nearest corridor, hands folded behind his back. The light here painted his hair bronze instead of black, his eyes molten instead of cold steel. "What do I have to do?" Elara asked, voice rough. "Very little," he said. "Somewhere in this maze is a woman who has not shed a tear in 100 years. Make her cry, and you pass. Fail, and the thorns will grow around you instead." "That's it?" "That's it." He smiled, and then he was simply gone, air folding around the space where he had stood. Elara muttered a curse under her breath and picked a direction. The maze twisted unpredictably, hedges shifting when she wasn't looking. Paths that had been open bristled with thorns when she glanced back. Time stretched, her legs ached. Once, she thought she saw the Alpha King's Hall through a break in the leaves, only for it to dissolve into mist when she reached for it. At last she stumbled into a small clearing. There, on a stone bench smothered in moss, sat an old woman. Her skin was the color of parchment, lined and folded. Her hair hung in straight, unremarkable gray strands. Her eyes were pale and perfectly dry. She regarded Elara with mild disinterest. "You're the one I'm meant to make cry," Elara said. The woman picked at a rose petal. "Many have tried. None have managed. The thorns take them eventually. They make good fertilizer." "How encouraging," Elara muttered. She tried sympathy first, because she would have wanted someone to try it with her. She asked the woman about her life, about the people she had lost, about regrets. The woman answered in flat, factual tones, as if reciting a shopping list. No flicker of grief stirred her eyes. Elara tried anger next. She insulted the woman's choices, questioned her courage, accused her of cowardice for sitting here while others turned to mulch in the hedges. The woman sniffed and told her not to be rude. Bribes failed. Logic failed. Jokes slid off the woman's face like raindrops on stone. Hours, or minutes, time felt slippery here, passed. Thorns crept subtly closer around the clearing, their tips gleaming. Elara's carefully hoarded composure frayed. "This is ridiculous," she snapped at last, pacing. "You sit here, waiting for strangers to perform emotional tricks, while people outside this place are dying. The Alpha King's sisters are dancing themselves to death. There are children singing about a monster with red eyes who will be executed if she can't save them. But you just sit. The woman yawned. And whose fault is that? Mine. Elara exploded. It's always my fault, isn't it? My fault my father left, my fault Maven cursed me because I wasn't pretty enough to be harmless, my fault every goat that drops dead within 10 miles. I didn't ask for any of it, but somehow I'm always the problem. Her voice cracked. To her horror, tears blurred her red-tinged vision. I drank her milk because I wanted someone to love me. I walked away from my home because I refused to be their shame. I let myself be chained and dragged to a king who saw a monster before he saw a person, and I still begged him for a chance to help. And now I'm here, in a hedge maze nightmare, arguing with a stranger who can't even be bothered to feel anything. Her throat closed. She pressed the heels of her hands to her burning eyes, but the sobs tore out anyway, raw and furious and helpless. Somewhere in the middle of it, a sound cut through her own ragged crying. A snort. Then a choked little wheeze. Then full, unrestrained laughter. Elara dropped her hands. The old woman was bent double, shoulders shaking, eyes streaming. Oh, child, she gasped between peals of laughter. You should see your face. All this drama. It's like watching a play written by a drunk poet. Cursed milk. Singing children. Obsidian thrones. You poor, miserable, melodramatic thing. Tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks, glistening as they fell. Atheron appeared at the edge of the clearing as if he'd stepped through an invisible door. He held a small crystal vial, which he deftly moved to catch each tear. Well done, he said to Elara over the woman's cackling. Most people try to make her sad. You discovered the far more efficient route of making a fool of yourself. I wasn't, Elara started, then stopped. You did that on purpose. Absolutely, he said, unrepentant. Trials are so tedious when people know what they're doing. He stoppered the vial. Light pulsed within it, shifting from blue to gold. The old woman straightened, laughter tapering off into soft chuckles. Her skin seemed to glow from within, the parchment loosening, smoothing. Flames licked along the edges of her shawl, not burning it, but transforming it into feathers of molten gold. Finally, she sighed. With a flare of light, her body unfolded into something vast and winged. A bird of living fire beat its wings once, showering the clearing with embers, and rose into the air with a triumphant cry. Then she was gone, leaving only scorch marks on the stone bench and a faint scent of smoke. Elara stared after her. Was she? Bound, like the princesses, Atheron said softly. Your tears freed her as much as hers freed you. You have a talent for loosening chains, little wolf. He offered her a hand. This time, she was too exhausted to refuse. The maze blurred as soon as her fingers touched his. When it steadied again, they stood on a balcony overlooking the Evernight court. Below them, Fae moved like streams of color. Above, the twilight sky arced eternal. Between trials, Atheron showed her his realm. He led her through the Hall of Whispers, where every careless promise mortals had ever made to the Fae drifted as faint, echoing voices. He let her wander the self-writing library, where books assembled sentences in midair and rearranged their own pages to keep truths from growing stale. They strolled through gardens that changed shape depending on the mood of whoever walked them, once turning into a field of sharp, crystal flowers at her spike of anger, once softening into moss and violets when she allowed herself a rare, quiet laugh. He asked questions as they walked. Why did humans lie when words could be so sharp and beautiful? What did it feel like to carry two shapes in one body and belong to neither? Why had she, of all people, taken a bargain that gave her 3 nights to save those who had hunted her? Elara answered some questions and sidestepped others. She learned, in turn, that for the Fae, language was not just communication but architecture. Each vow laid another stone. Each promise built a wall or a bridge. Lies were not merely frowned upon, they were seen as rot-eating at the foundations of everything. You twist truth all the time, she pointed out once as they sat in a courtyard where the stars grew like fruit on trees. Twisting is not breaking, he said. I bend the branches. I do not poison the roots. She didn't know what unsettled her more, that he saw the lines so clearly, or that he seemed determined to understand where hers lay. Time in Evernight slipped like water through cupped hands. Elara only realized how much had passed when she ducked under a low arch one day and nearly collided with a cluster of fluttering pixies gossiping over a pool. Weeks and weeks, she's been here, one chimed. The wolf girl with the red eyes. I saw her make the maze crone laugh. Mortals don't last long, another said. Their bodies forget to sleep properly. Their hearts tangle. She'll stay. They always do, if he plays with them long enough. Besides, a third added, for them it's only one night above. They never notice until it's too late. Elara froze. Weeks. Above, in Railstone halls, they would think she had been gone only hours. The princess's slippers would still be dust. Her head would still be promised to the block if she returned without answers. But down here, she was already losing days. Maybe parts of herself, too. She excused herself from Atheron's side at the first polite opportunity and wandered deeper into the gardens, following a path that felt wrong. Too still. Too quiet. It opened into a grove. Golden trees stood in neat rows, their trunks smooth, their branches heavy with leaves that glowed softly from within. At first she thought they were carved from metal. Then she saw the curve of a cheekbone barely visible under bark. A hand half fused with a branch. Eyes closed, as if sleeping. Not ornaments. Not exactly. Prisoners. Some wore remnants of armor. One had the faint outline of a crown. Another, horrifyingly, had the Alpha King's crest burned into what remained of his cloak. Champions. Warriors. People who had bargained, as she had, and lost. Her stomach turned. If she failed, she would stand here among them, roots sunk deep, consciousness trapped in wood and gold while centuries drifted by. Beautiful, aren't they? Atheron's voice was quiet behind her. She turned, fury rising like a tide. You never meant to hurry the last trial. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. You're angry, he observed. You're delaying, she shot back. You could have set the final trial the moment I woke from the second. Instead you've shown me libraries and gardens and tricks and tried to make me forget why I'm here. Have I? He asked softly. Forget, then, the princesses gasping on my floors? Forget the king who looked at you and saw only a monster to be used? Yes, she said. Forget them. Forget me. Replace us with golden trees and interesting puzzles. Silence stretched between them, taut as a drawn bow. Little wolf, he said at last, and now there was no amusement in his voice at all. I have not forgotten anything. It is you who forgets that staying is also a choice you could make. She stepped closer, close enough to see the faint reflection of herself in his silver blue eyes, furred ears, red gaze, mouth set. "Then hear this," she said. "I choose not to stay. I choose not to be a tree. I choose not to let those girls die because you were bored. You promised 3 trials. You swore it. Start the last one now." His jaw tightened, the only crack in his composure she had seen. "You are very certain you will survive it," he said. "I'm not," she replied. "But I am certain I won't sleep in your beautiful cages while people who never had a choice bleed for it." The golden leaves rustled, though no wind stirred them. Slowly, Atheron inclined his head. "As you wish," he said, and the words rang with the weight of a vow. "The final trial begins at the next turning of the Evernight bell." Magic shifted around them, the air thickening, the ground humming under her boots. Elara looked past him to the grove of silent, gilded figures and thought of all the lives hanging on what came next, the princesses, the lost champions, the monster with red eyes who refused to be anyone's ornament. If she failed, she would take her place among these trees. If she succeeded, she would rip roots out of centuries-old bargains. Either way, there would be no turning back. The Evernight bell tolled once, clear and cold as a blade striking glass. Sound rippled through the golden grove, shivering down the trunks of the sleeping champions. Leaves rustled, magic stirred. A path of light unfurled at Elara's feet, winding away from the trees toward the heart of the court. Atheron watched her from the edge of the grove, hands folded behind his back, face unreadable. "You could still change your mind," he said quietly. "No," Elara replied. "You already rang the bell." For a heartbeat, something like regret crossed his eyes. "Then come, little wolf," he said. "Let us see what you truly need." The final ballroom made every hall she had seen before look like practice sketches. It hung suspended over nothing, a vast circle of crystal and air. Above, the twilight sky burned deeper, streaked with ribbons of aurora. Below, there was no floor, no lake, only darkness pricked with distant stars. The walls were nothing but arches and columns, open to the endless horizon. The court of Evernight had gathered in full. Fae nobles lounged on hovering balconies, their garments shimmering like cut gems. Music thrummed from no visible source, low, insistent, the pulse of some great sleeping heart. At the center of the suspended floor, Atheron turned to her. "For your final trial," he said, voice carrying easily, "the rules are simple. Find what you truly need to go home before the last dance ends." "That's all?" Elara asked. "That is everything." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "The danger lies in not knowing what you need." The music swelled. Fae pairs slipped onto the crystal, moving with effortless grace. The air tasted of ozone and rose petals. Atheron stepped closer, hand half extended. "One dance," he said. "To begin." Her instinct was to refuse, to keep him at arm's length, to prove she wasn't dazzled, not anymore. But the eyes of the court pressed on her like physical weight, and part of surviving among predators was choosing when not to flinch. "Fine," she said. "One." He did not touch her. Instead, he moved opposite her, mirroring her stance. As the music shifted, he stepped forward, she stepped back. He crossed left, she turned right. It was a dance built on reflected motion, two bodies orbiting the same invisible point without ever meeting. Elara's cloak flared around her ankles. Her cursed ears caught every whisper of silk, every breath Atheron drew. He watched her with unnerving intensity, the silver blue of his eyes bright against the dark. Resentment simmered under her skin. So did something softer she refused to name, something born of crystal libraries and mood-tangled gardens, and the way he had looked at her when she stood in the grove and told him no. "You're stalling," she said as they circled, steps perfect, never colliding. "This isn't a trial. It's a spectacle." "Why can't it be both?" he countered. "Besides, you have not yet begun to search for what you need." "What I need is your gate open and your hands off the princesses." "And what do you need?" he asked softly, "for yourself?" The music darkened. The world tilted. The ballroom melted away like frost in sunlight. Elara blinked and found herself standing on familiar stone, the Alpha King's Hall. The ceiling towered overhead, torches guttered in their brackets. Rael sat upon his obsidian throne, cloak spread like shadow, expression carved from ice. She stood below him on the steps, the way she had the day she'd been dragged in chains before him. Her hood was gone. Gasps echoed around the hall as courtiers recoiled from her red eyes, her furred cheeks, the ears that twitched atop her head. "There," someone whispered. "The monster." Rael's gaze pinned her. "You failed," he said. "My sisters are dead. The blame is yours." Guards moved toward her, blades drawn. At the far end of the hall, a scaffold waited, gallows rope swaying gently though there was no breeze. Elara's breath caught. "This isn't real," she said. A voice answered near her ear, low and calm. "Pain is rarely original," Atheron murmured, though she could not see him. "Only rearranged." The image of the hall flickered. The gallows vanished. The courtiers blurred into smears of color. Rael's form held a heartbeat longer, then dissolved into motes of darkness. Elara stood once more in the suspended ballroom, but not as she had. A mirror had appeared before her, tall and gilded, frame twined with golden vines. The surface shimmered, cloudy, then cleared. She stared. Her reflection stared back, but not the one she knew. This Elara had smooth, unblemished skin. No fur on her cheeks or arms. No wolf ears jutting through her hair. Her eyes were a warm, clear brown, human and ordinary and safe. She wore a gown of deep green that fitted her perfectly, the kind of dress Maven might have called almost flattering before finding a way to ruin it. She looked lovely. Not Sylvain beautiful, not dazzling, but whole. Soft. Acceptable. Her cursed self, standing outside the glass, felt suddenly too sharp. Too jagged. A wrongness carved into the same shape. "Imagine," Atheron said. He appeared at her shoulder, his reflection smooth and perfect beside the illusion of the human Elara. His presence warmed the air. "No more hiding under hoods," he went on. "No more children's rhymes. No more doors closing, no more men swallowing their revulsion before they remember to be polite. I can make this true, if you stay." He lifted his hand. In the mirror, the human Elara smiled and took it. The scene shifted around them, the crystal court, the dancing Fae, Atheron on a throne grown from moonlight with Elara beside him, crowned and clad in emerald. Her body in the glass moved with easy confidence, as if she had never flinched from a reflection in her life. "My queen," he said in the illusion, voice full of quiet reverence. Elara's throat went tight. "Is this how you see me?" she forced out. No, Atheron's gaze flicked from the reflection to the real woman. "This is how you think you must be to be loved." He moved then, circling her slowly, not touching. How I see you, he said, is somewhat different. The mirror changed. Her reflection shifted back to the form she knew, fur, ears, red eyes, but the glass caught details she had never truly looked at, the strength in the set of her jaw, the steadiness of her gaze, the coiled power in the way she held herself, ready to spring or stand firm as needed. The cloak sat on her shoulders like a mantle. The wolf in her bled into the human, not as a flaw, but as an edge. A curse, he said softly, is just magic someone else wrote on you. It does not decide the story unless you let it. Warmth spread under her skin at his words, dangerous and tempting. Elara. He stepped in front of her, between her and the mirror, close enough that she could see faint gold threads glimmering in his irises. Stay. Rule at my side. I will strip your curse from memory. In Evernight you will never have been a monster at all. You will be safe. Desired. Adored. No one will laugh or shrink from you here. The music surged around them, sweet and heady. The court watched with hungry curiosity. Elara pictured it, a life without jeers or suspicion. No more hooded walks through hostile markets. No more guards looking at her as if weighing chains. No more waking each morning already braced for disgust. She also pictured Rail's sisters, their slippers worn to threads. The champions in the Golden Grove, faces smoothed by bark. The old woman in the maze, laughing herself into flame because Elara's misery had finally shaken something loose. What about them? She asked, throat rough. The princesses? The ones already trees? Atheron's jaw flexed. They are the price your world agreed to pay long ago. They didn't agree, she snapped. They were born into a debt they never chose. As were you, he said. Tell me, what has your world ever given you but pain? A father who turned away, a stepmother who carved her envy into your skin, a king who would have killed you if you had not been useful. Do you truly owe them anything? The question sank claws into the softest parts of her. No. She didn't owe them. If the world had justice, it would be clawing the curse off her now, not asking her to risk what little she had left for strangers. In the mirror, the human Elara smiled serenely, unburdened by bargains or guilt. The music crept under her guard, coaxing, promising rest. Haven. Love. You could stay, a traitorous voice whispered. Let the champions remain trees. Let the princesses dance. They are not your sisters. They did not sing about red eyes in the streets. Let them pay their own price. Her fingers twitched, as if reaching for Atheron's outstretched hand. He watched her, expression carefully neutral. Only his eyes betrayed him, bright, intent, pleading. It hit her then. This was the trial. Not some puzzle with hidden cups, not a maze with a riddle wearing an old woman's face. This was choice, stripped to bone, her comfort or their freedom. Her loneliness soothed, or other people's suffering ended. She thought of her mother's words, worn but unbroken in the back of her mind. What you carry inside is what lasts. Elara shut her eyes. In the darkness behind her lids, she let herself admit the things she'd been avoiding since the boat first slid up to the shore. She cared about him. This infuriating, dangerous king who turned trials into games and cages into wonders. She liked his questions and his laughter and the way he saw straight through the shell of monster and spoke to the girl still huddled beneath. Her heart twisted. Caring didn't make him right. She opened her eyes. I want this, she said quietly, nodding toward the mirror. toward the image of herself whole and human and beloved. I won't pretend otherwise. I want to stop being someone else's horror story. A flicker of hope lit his face. But I need, she went on, voice strengthening, to be someone I can live with. She stepped back, away from his reach and the mirror both. I will not stay while innocent people rot into trees for your amusement. I will not let those girls die so I can have pretty dresses and a clean reflection. You asked what I needed to go home? I need to know I chose them over myself. Silence punched through the music. A hairline crack chased itself across the mirror's surface. Another followed, and another, threading through the green-clad illusion of Elara until the glass spiderwebbed with fractures. The ballroom trembled. Light flickered. Fae clutched at railings as the crystal floor shuddered underfoot. Atheron flinched as if struck. For a heartbeat, raw hurt lay bare in his eyes. Is my love, he asked, very softly, so terrible a fate? Her chest ached. It isn't your love that's the fate. It's your cage. The words hung between them, tasting of iron and truth. Then the mirror shattered. Sound crashed over them like a tidal wave, glass breaking, music distorting into a howl, the collective gasp of the Evernight court. The fragments of the mirror did not fall, they turned to light and dissolved, leaving only empty air. The dancers vanished. The balancing balconies faded. One by one, the Fae winked out like extinguished candles until only Atheron and Elara remained on the cracking floor of the suspended hall. He straightened slowly, every line of him a mask of cool composure. Only the tightness around his mouth betrayed strain. Very well, he said. You have chosen. By the terms I set, you have passed. The last of the illusion peeled away. Light swallowed her. It felt like falling and flying at once, pulled through a narrow tunnel of brilliance. For a moment there was no up, no down, just the wild rush of magic unwinding. She hit stone on her knees. Elara blinked against torchlight. The scent of smoke and steel and too many human bodies crowded her senses. She was back in the Alpha King's Hall. The obsidian throne loomed ahead of her. Rael sat upon it exactly as he had when she left, as if he had not moved in the hours since her trial began. His cloak spilled down the steps like a shadow-given weight. But his sisters. They stood beside her now, no longer hollow-eyed. Their cheeks were flushed, their limbs steady. Their slippers, brand new, were scuffed but intact. Confusion warred with relief on their faces. Around them, dozens more people appeared in flares of gold and white, warriors in half-rotted armor, women in faded finery, men with calloused hands. All of them looked dazed, as if wrenched from a long sleep. The champions of the Golden Grove. Freed. Shouts erupted. Guards surged forward, blades half-drawn, only to falter as they recognized sigils and faces from old tapestries and mourning songs. Rael rose slowly. What sorcery is this? He demanded, voice ringing along the rafters. His gaze speared Elara. Explain yourself, monster. Elara pushed to her feet, legs unsteady. Her heart pounded, but her voice did not shake. You wanted to know where your sisters went each night, she said. They were taken to the court of Evernight, forced to dance for the Fae King's amusement. I bargained for their freedom. 3 trials, in exchange for breaking the curse that bound them. She told him, quickly but without flinching, about the Silver Lake and the Crystal Ballroom, the trials of poison and tears, the maze, and the old woman and the grove of living statues. She spoke Atheron's name and watched the courtiers shudder as if feeling cold fingers down their spines. When she finished, the hall seethed with murmurs. Lies, one noble spat. Fae tricks and tales. Convenient that she claims to have faced mortal peril where none of us could see, another sneered. Rael's expression barely shifted, but his hands clenched on the arms of his throne. Even if I believed you, he said, what proof have you that this king exists, beyond the return of those I thought lost? Elara's gaze slid past him, to the far end of the hall. The golden tree dominated the space there, roots twisting across the floor, branches arching up to brush the arched ceiling. Light clung to it in a way that was not wholly natural, pooling in the hollows where knots should be. She had seen trees like that before. In Evernight. In the Grove of Bound Champions. How long has that been here? She asked. Rael's eyes narrowed. That is no concern of yours. It is now, she said. Answer. The king's jaw flexed. An heir of mine won it centuries ago, he said at last, the words clipped. He outwitted a Fae lord in a contest of riddles. The tree was the prize. It stands by ancient decree forever, unless touched by true sunlight. A symbol of our triumph over their kind. Forever there it was again, that particular Fae weight on a human tongue. And unless touched by true sunlight, a clause, an escape embedded in the punishment. Elara's skin prickled. You said I could claim one favor if I solved your sister's mystery, she reminded him. Do you deny it? Murmurs rippled through the hall. Rael's mouth thinned. I do not break my word, he said. Name your reward. Every courtier leaned in, expecting jewels, land, freedom. Perhaps, at most, safe passage out of the kingdom for a cursed half-wolf girl. I want the roof above that tree opened, Elara said, pointing. Let real sunlight touch it. Silence crashed down. That is all, one counselor blurted. You waste such a boon on weather? Rael's eyes glinted. You suspect it is more than weather, he said slowly. You think that tree is another of your Fae friends. I think, Elara replied, that your ancestor never outwitted anyone. I think he trapped a king and called it victory. Lyris, the third sister, stepped forward, face pale. Brother, she saved us. Give her what she asks. The freed champions added their voices, ragged but resolute. Honor your bargain, one called. You owe her that, if nothing else. Rael's nostrils flared. He looked from his sisters to the golden tree to the cursed girl standing defiant in the middle of his hall. Very well, he ground out. Open it. Servants scrambled. Chains clanked as massive panels in the ceiling were hauled aside, inch by stubborn inch. Dust rained down in lazy spirals. For a moment, gray daylight washed the stone, thin, filtered through cloud. Then the sun broke free. A single shaft of pure gold speared down, striking the crown of the tree. The effect was immediate. The bark glowed, veins of light racing down the trunk like lightning seeking ground. Leaves shook, shedding motes of molten gold. The air thrummed with power so intense Elara's teeth ached. The court backed away in a collective rush. Rael's hand went to the hilt of his sword. With a sound like shattering glass, the outer layer of bark split and fell away in burning sheets, dissolving before they hit the floor. From the heart of the tree, a figure stepped. A man, tall and terrible and beautiful. Gold fire clung to him like a second skin, peeling away in slow embers to reveal dark armor worked with living vines. Antlers of molten light curved from his temples before settling into a crown of slender branches. His hair fell in a dark spill over his shoulders, his eyes burned molten gold, not the silver blue Elara knew, but when they found her, the same familiar grief and relief and hunger flickered there. Atheron. Not a projection ruling from afar. Not a shadow bound to his own court. Fully, fiercely present. Gasps echoed around the hall. Someone screamed. A few of the older nobles dropped to their knees, muttering old prayers they'd forgotten the words to. Atheron took one step forward, then another, looking around at the hall with cold, sharp assessment. His gaze lingered on Rael, on the throne, then returned to Elara as if pulled by gravity. "Little wolf," he said, voice hoarse with disuse and power. "You are annoyingly consistent." Something tight in her chest loosened. "You're welcome." The corner of his mouth twitched. Rael dragged his sword free in a hiss of steel. "You freed a demon into my hall," he snarled at Elara. "You endanger my people. You betray the very realm that tolerated your existence." Lyra stepped between them before Elara could answer. "She saved us," she repeated, louder. "And she saved your champions." Her sisters joined her, a line of royal daughters standing shoulder to shoulder. Behind them, the freed warriors hefted their mismatched weapons and straightened, scars and sigils blazing. "We owe our lives to her," one called. "We will not see her condemned for keeping your word where you would not." Chaos threatened to erupt, guards shifting, courtiers shouting, magic prickling in the air. Atheron lifted his hand. Sound dimmed, muffled as if the hall had been wrapped in mist. People's mouths still moved, but their voices dulled, distant. Only Elara heard him clearly. "I could not ask you to free me," he said, stepping close until he stood within arm's reach. The gold in his eyes had cooled to a deep, steady glow. "Bindings like that are particular. Speaking of them directly strengthens them. Had I told you the tree was me, the chains would have tightened. So I did what I am best at." His mouth twisted. "I hinted. I tempted. I delayed when I should have hurried, because the thought of you walking away, win or lose, felt worse than another century in bark." Elara swallowed. "You kept me there to amuse yourself." "Yes," he said. "And to keep breathing. Both can be true." Honesty, sharp as any lie, could have been soft. The muffled chaos swelled again as the spell eased. Rael shouted something about binding circles, guards tried to press forward and were shoved back by the line of resurrected champions. In the midst of it, Atheron turned fully to Elara. "This time," he said, "no illusions. No mirrors." He took a single step closer, close enough that the heat of his newly freed magic brushed her cursed skin. "You can go back to your world alone," he said. "I will honor that. Or you can return to Evernight with me, not as a prisoner, not as a trinket, but as my equal. Before you choose, you deserve clarity." Her heart hammered. "Clarity sounds suspicious coming from you." "Then listen carefully." His voice dropped, each word deliberate. "If you come, I will not bind you against your will. I will not share you. I will not lie to you. I will not treat you as anything less than my partner in all things." The air vibrated. Each statement rang like a struck bell. Elara's breath hitched. "You realize those sound like vows?" "They are." He lifted his chin, eyes never leaving hers. "Let all who care for such things bear witness." Around them, the Evernight court shimmered into being like a reflection in rippling water, translucent but present, high above immortal hall. Fae nobles leaned from invisible balconies, watching. The two worlds overlapped for a heartbeat, human stone and Fae crystal sharing space. Atheron raised his hand, palm outward, as if swearing before both courts. Elara Thorn, he said, and her name in his mouth carried more weight than any title. I value my eternity. Not as a cage, but as a road we walk together for as long as you wish my company. Magic surged, brushing her skin like wind from an open door. I value my loyalty, he continued, voice steady. No plots against you, no bargains made over your head. Your enemies are mine. Your battles, my battles. The glow around him brightened. I value my exclusivity, he said, and a ripple of scandalized delight ran through the Fae mirage. No other queen, no other consort, no heart divided. One throne, shared between us alone. The air crackled. Threads of light spun from his chest toward hers, seeking. Say no, he added softly, for her ears alone, and I will cut these cords myself. I will not make you a tree, or a prisoner, or anything you do not choose to be. His final words left his lips and the magic lunged. It hit Elara like a storm. Warmth poured through her veins, searing and sweet. Something deep inside her, some knot tied by Maven's curse years ago, pulled tight, then snapped with a sound like distant thunder. Maven's voice rose from memory, smug and poisonous. Your curse will break when someone willingly takes you as you are. Someone. Not a human. Not a wolf. Just, someone. Atheron stood before her, eyes blazing, having just bound himself, with full knowledge of what she was, to a lifetime at her side. Light exploded out of her. Fur melted from her cheeks and arms, receding like tidewater. Her ears shifted, bones cracking and sliding until they lay flat against her skull, human once more. Her red eyes flared brighter, then cooled, the unnatural glow bleeding away to reveal their original warm brown shot through with faint gold. She staggered, clutching at the sudden emptiness where the constant itch of the curse had lived. Power hummed under her skin, but it was hers now, not Maven's. Not stolen from a cup. Not forced. The hall gasped as one. Elara raised shaking hands to her face. Smooth skin met her fingertips, no fur, no scars. Her teeth brushed her tongue, still sharp, but no longer cruelly elongated. Her cloak settled differently without the weight of ears. She did not look like the flawless girl from Atheron's mirror. She looked like herself, the way she might have grown if jealousy hadn't interrupted the process, sturdy, strong-featured, eyes bright with intelligence and stubbornness. Her spine felt straighter. Still plain, she muttered, half-dazed. Not to me, Atheron said. Rael stared, sword forgotten at his side. Around him, courtiers whispered, witch, miracle, cursebreaker. Maven's long-ago scheme lay in shards on the stones, undone without her even setting foot in the hall. Atheron exhaled slowly, relief and awe and something aching in his expression. In Fae law, he said quietly, what I just spoke were marriage vows. You are not bound until you choose it, but I am, regardless. Elara laughed, the sound a little wild. That seems unfair. Then make it fair, he said, and for once there was no teasing in him at all. Only hope. Come with me. Behind him, a portal unfolded, a circle of darkness rimmed in starlight, opening onto the silver lake and the crystal arches of Evernight. The Fae mirage sharpened, their court leaning forward like an audience on the edge of their seats. Around her, humans watched too. Some with suspicion, some with fear, a few with something like respect. The rescued princesses clutched one another's hands. The champions stood ready, waiting to see what their reluctant savior would do. Elara looked back at the throne where she had once knelt in chains. This hall had been the place she expected to die, faceless and despised. Now she stood at its center unbound, her curse broken not by beauty or pity, but by a choice she'd made to value others over herself, and by a king who had learned, painfully, to do the same. She turned back to Atheron. "If I come," she said, "I come as Elara Thorn. Not red eyes. Not a trophy. Not a story you get to rewrite." "Agreed," he said immediately. "I will speak when I disagree," she added. "I would worry if you didn't." She searched his face one last time, looking for cracks, for hidden hooks. Found only a man who had been a tree for 3 centuries and still managed to be afraid. Elara took a breath. "Then yes," she said. "I'll walk that road with you." The magic that had been hovering between them surged forward, settling into place with a sensation like a lock turning. The overlapping courts flared brighter, the Evernight Fae bowed as one, acknowledging their new queen. Atheron reached for her hand. This time, she took it. He drew from his sleeve a circlet of living crystal and gold leaves. It unfurled on his fingers like a growing branch, light pulsing along its veins. With careful hands, he set it on her head. "Queen of Evernight," he said, voice carrying across both halls. "Breaker of chains. Chosen, not claimed." Power shivered through her at the words, but it felt like responsibility, not ownership. Behind them, the rescued champions and princesses straightened as invisible bonds fell away fully, their faces alight with sudden ease. Somewhere far below, in the underground cavern, the silver lake stilled and the crystal pavilion emptied. The old patterns had been broken. Elara glanced back one final time at Rael's throne, at the kingdom that had called her monster and yet had driven her toward the place where she could become something else. Rejected and cursed by her jealous stepmother, she murmured under her breath, her mother's voice echoing softly within. "Nearly killed on the Alpha King stones." Then she turned toward the portal, toward the starlit lake and the court that shimmered like a mirage becoming real. Hand in hand with Atheron, Elara Thorn stepped through, not kneeling, not hiding, not begging. Just walking beside him, their joined silhouettes framed against a curtain of starlight. Carrying with her a mind sharp enough to unravel curses, a heart stubborn enough to choose others over herself, and a love fierce enough to rewrite every story that had ever been written about her name. If this story caught your attention, subscribe and join us for the next chapter.